welcome to Living Mirrors with Dr. James Cook. My guest this week is Lawrence Millman. Lawrence is an adventurer, writer, and mycologist. He's the author of many books, including Northern Latitudes, Lost in the Arctic, A Kayak Full of Ghosts, which is how I first came across his work, Fascinating Fungi of New England, Mushroom Apocalypse, Giant Polypores and Stoned Reindeer, and most recently Fungipedia, a brief compendium of mushroom lore. His work has also appeared in Smithsonian, National Geographic Adventure, The Atlantic Monthly, and Sports Illustrated. He's won numerous awards and has been anthologized in the Best American Travel Writing 3 years in a row. Lawrence also holds a Ph.D. in literature from Rutgers University. He's made over 30 trips to the Arctic and Subarctic during his adventuring career and was a fellow of the prestigious Explorers Club, along with the likes of Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay, who first climbed Everest. In his travels, he discovered a previously unknown lake in Borneo and had a mountain named after him outside Tasiilaq in eastern Greenland. Today we talk about shamanism in the Arctic and the use of the psychoactive Amanita muscaria or fly agaric mushroom in those traditions and the connection to the modern Santa Claus myth. Hope you enjoyed the conversation. Okay, I'm here with Lawrence Millman. Lawrence, thanks for coming on the podcast.
James, I appreciate you having me here.
So you just got back from a mushroom hunting trip. Maybe you could tell us a bit about what you did.
Well, I am a cold weather aficionado. I've done a lot of ethnographic work in the Arctic. I'm also a mycologist, and I combined my cold weather affection with my interest in fungi. And a lot of people think that fungi go to the Costa del Sol for the winter. Not the case at all, especially in wooded areas. They use logs as parkas, and they grow on the underside of logs. So where I was, I'm doing an ongoing inventory on an island called Nalshan off of Cape Cod. And, it's an interesting place. It has only seasoners, no cars, and people who are a bit wealthy get around by horseback. And the only Wi-Fi is in the stable. So one could argue that one is standing in shite, accessing the internet, which that has quite a bit of shite on it too. Anyway, I'm researching the fungi, and at this time of year, it's entirely wood-inhabiting fungi, mostly under logs. And I found quite a few interesting specimens and ended up with a frostbitten finger.
That must happen to you a lot, I imagine, in your line of work.
Yes, that was for me, actually, that was the most interesting specimen because I've spent an enormous amount of time in the Arctic. I've never had frostbite before because I've always dressed accordingly. But rolling over logs to look for fungi, I do that with my bare hands, so I don't have gloves on. And I'm so obsessed with fungi that I'm not aware of the fact that I might be freezing.
Wow. And how did you first come to have this fascination with these kind of places in the Arctic?
With the Arctic, it's hard to say. I think it's genetic. My father would drive around with the AC on in his car in the dead of winter and hung out in the basement where he was a carpenter. And I got to love the basement, which was darker and cooler than any other part of the house. And as a kid, I hated the heat. The heat and humidity would drive me absolutely bonkers. But I loved cold weather, and I love wandering outside. And this continues to the present day. I had a girlfriend not so long ago that she would be under 5 blankets and shivering, and I would be on top of all those blankets sweating. And she finally sent me to the doctor thinking something was wrong with me. There are probably all sorts of things wrong with me, but it wasn't the thyroid issue.
So,
but anyway, all of this kind of came together. I would travel to the north. I did a book on the west of Ireland, not overwhelmingly cold place, but I chose that because I appreciated both the people and, sort of the gray, wet, cool climate. And from there, I went to Iceland. And from Iceland, I went to Greenland, and Greenland to the Canadian Arctic. I sort of moved increasingly north over the years.
Right. And one of the, so, we're doing, I guess, a relatively seasonal episode here because I have a lot of interest in psychoactive, naturally occurring substances. And one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was the use in Siberia of Amanita muscaria mushrooms amongst reindeer herding people. And you've spent time with these people, right, in Siberia?
Yes, I have indeed.
And is the reindeer herding the kind of the commonality? Because there's a lot of different groups of people, right, all the way from Lapland through to Siberia, and they're all reindeer herders.
Yes. Yes, and I was with the Chukchi, who are in the northeastern part of Siberia, in the Arctic. And I actually initially went there to document the current use of Amanita muscaria, what they call wapak, W-A-P-A-K. Because I had read in a number of places that in Siberia, the use was dying out and had been replaced by vodka. And especially in Stalin's time, because using a psychoactive mushroom to get high on was looked upon as being, how we say, not communistic, too individual. And there indeed was a, I don't know if it was true or a joke, but it was a nasty joke if it was, where the shamans would be herded together, and one of the effects is the feeling of flying when you eat this mushroom. Herded together, taken up in an airplane, then the cargo door is opened, and one of the Stalinist henchmen will say, "Oh, you like to fly, don't you?" And then they would push the shamans out and say, "Well, fly then." Anyway, what I did was I went up the coast, starting in Providenia, a formerly Soviet town, and to try to document the use. But in fact, what I wanted to do, and what I usually do when I'm collecting lore, I don't immediately say, "Well, can you tell me someone who is commonly using this?" I would just hang out with people and let them get to know me, and I would get to know them, and either see if it comes up naturally, or after a while, maybe over beer, say, "Tell me, are people around here still using wapak?" And I especially didn't want to do this in Chukotka because there still is a kind of traumatic feeling about the Stalinist years, about what people were forced to do. And you bring up, an outsider, as it were, Russians were outsiders, asking questions like this could get either a negative reaction, erroneous reaction, or cause people to be upset. So I waited, and after a while, having proved myself to be not a Stalinist, people would open up to me.
And what did you find when they opened up to you? Were you inquiring about all aspects of how it's used today?
Yes, I was inquiring about it. It is in a state of great decline. Mostly it was only elders, Chukchi elders, who were very familiar with it. Others knew it by reputation only. And they would tell me stories that were in fact documented in a lot of the early ethnographic literature by some of the Soviet. There were a few very, very good Soviet anthropologists who visited Chukotka and wrote about the use of Amanita muscaria. And I found out, actually found certain things repeated over 100 years later to my ears, one of which is that, watch out, don't damage the cap of the mushroom when you collect it. If you do, you're going to end up with a severe headache, i.e. your cap, or something like that. Or don't damage the stem when you collect it, because something bad will happen to your legs. And in fact, I asked a local Chukchi man, something bad, what do you mean by something bad? It may need to be amputated, he said. You know, and in a way, I damaged, there was a sense of kinship with the mushroom. And I should add that we do have a kinship with mushrooms, going back, you probably know this, going back to 500 million years ago. We have a common protist, a marine flagellate, whereas plants have a totally different protists. So we're not related at all to plants. But that protist, it went on and became crustaceans, insects, shrimp, mushrooms, and a lot of them we don't, or at least I don't, chitin in their cell walls. But in any event, I went up, my ultimate destination was the mouth of the Kulima River, where there's a giant boulder with petrographs of mushroom-headed people. And there's a wonderful film. I may have to look the name of the film up in my recent book, Fungipedia, which I highly recommend to you. You know, it has exactly the sort of information in it that I'm telling you. Just published this past year. It's the Pegtamel River, not the Klima. And at Pegtamel, what I say here, carved into the rocks near the mouth of Siberia's Pegtamel River are Bronze Age petroglyphs called mushroom people by the local Chukchi reindeer herders. These petroglyphs look exactly like people who have giant mushrooms, specifically fly agarics, Amanita muscaria, perched on top of their heads. And it's believed that these petroglyphs celebrate the Bronze Age use of this mushroom by local people.
Right. I recommend people Google that image, because there are lots of images out there where people speculate, you know, are these ancient depictions of mushrooms? And in this case, it's a home run. They really do look like mushroom-headed people. You know,
you've seen them then?
Yeah, they're wonderful.
Wonderful.
And
do you know the film?
No, I don't.
Based on, I reckon this is a wonderful anthropological film called Pegtamel. And I've met I'm going to see, my pronunciation of his name will be better when I read it. It's Andrei Golovnev. He made a film called Pegtamel. It's a documentary film, half an hour long. It used to be free on YouTube. I don't know if it is anymore. But he went to live with some very elderly Chukchi and did exactly what I did. Instead of saying, well, right away, I have limited time. You know, I'm a very busy fellow. Please tell me right away about the current use of wapak. No, he just hung out with them. And in the film, he gives you that feeling by filming all sorts of other things in their lives. So there is a context to the use of Amanita muscaria.
Right, and it shows this.
I highly
well,
recommend
right?
it. Yeah, it is. It's a very unstaged but very lyrical documentary film. And what he does with camera is he goes back and forth between the contemporary use of these Chukchi elders' use of Amanita muscaria and the images of the mushroom-headed people on the rocks. It's extraordinary.
That sounds great. I'll have to watch that. Yeah, it's also worth lingering on the point you made about our kinship with mushrooms, because it blows my mind whenever I think about it. You know, as you say, we're more closely related to them than we are to plants, and they respire, you know, they take in oxygen, they put out carbon dioxide like we do. The fact they produce all these chemicals that can be used that act on our brains is because their physiology is so similar to us. And I have a vivid memory of the first time I plucked a mushroom, and I remember feeling the stalk, and it didn't feel like pulling a plant. It felt like grabbing a mouse or something.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. No, I feel the same way when I'm studying them. I don't actively grab them and collect them and place them on tables at forays. Over collecting, I think, is bad. To me, I think it's analogous to a birder going out and coming back with a giant basket full of eggs. Not good for the organism. Also, we're both of us, you, me, and the rest, all other 8 million of us, plus mushrooms, are heterophilic, which means we get our nutrients from our immediate environments, all the food from around us, rather than like plants from photosynthetic energy.
Right. And I guess the main difference being we put the food inside our bodies and digest it, whereas mushrooms kind of excrete enzymes, right, and digest it in place, which is another way to go about it.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
So with the Amanita use, when they're being used today and also in the past, is it, the word shamanism, right, comes from these cultures, and so is it being used in a kind of shamanic, like healing, or for like divination, predicting the future? Did you find out what kind of uses they have for it?
Not much today. I would say that died out more or less during the Stalinist years. On the other hand, there's just as I suppose we could call some people's use of psilocybin mushrooms shamanic, like they want to find out something mystical. A lot of, especially older people, younger people do occasionally use Amanita muscarias to get high on, but more frequently they'll use vodka. Older people will, on occasion, use them the way shamans use them, to get in touch with their ancestors. And the ancestors inhabit a below the ground realm. And let us say a person has a problem. What's causing this terrible ache in my spine? Well, I think that as there's no decent doctor around, and obviously no shaman, the best thing to do is have an Amanita muscaria, go down, visit my great-grandmother, who was a healer, and find out what she thinks. One of the effects, have you had Amanita muscarias, by the way?
No, I haven't.
Okay, well, it's very interesting. One of the effects I have found is a sense of positivity. And being essentially a pessimist, my ex said that I was a glass half empty person. And I said, that's not true. I'm a glass 3/4 empty person. So one of the effects I found in taking it is it gives me a sense of positivity. Euphoria and positivity. I see, what did we say? I was in a place where there was a lot of construction going around. And before I had taken it, I was, doing nothing but bitch and complain about the construction to the person I was with. After I took it, I saw all the things being constructed and the devices and the cranes and the caterpillars geometrically, as if indeed they were some sort of art form. Now, in a way, that's not good because they're not an art form, but I'm describing that to you to indicate one of the effects. So if one takes the mushroom and has some terrible back problem, and you think you're visiting your ancestors, what you might get in return is some positive way. And one finds in psychological circles that thinking positively can help you solve more problems than thinking negatively. So that may be the way they're visiting their ancestors, so to speak, quote unquote.
Yeah, that's a great point. There's a lot of, as you say, scientific evidence backing up that kind of positive thinking. Hadn't made that connection before. So when people take these for the effects, people, if you consume it fresh, right, it's quite unpleasant because it contains ibotenic acid. But if you dry it, that breaks down into muscimol, right, which is the kind of psychoactive component.
It's
And
called
do they dry them in the trees?
Yeah. Sorry?
I've heard that they hang them in the trees, like in pine trees, to dry them. Is that something you observed?
In the old days, yes, but no longer. They will dry them in ovens and other places. And there still is this belief in taking them that you can only take odd numbers, that it will be bad luck if you take even numbers. And 3 is the usual number, 3 dried specimens that will cause the necessary effects. What you want to do is somehow get rid of all the ibotenic acid, which is a alkaloid that can have not serious effects. In fact, there is no known death documented from someone eating Amanita muscaria, despite the literature which argues there have been. But there are veritably thousands of known gastroenterological issues, none of them quite serious. It tends to open the sluices at both ends, and for a while. So you decarboxylate the ibotenic acid, but you can't do all, it's hard to do all of it. And you will sometimes, even when you've got a dried specimen, end up with a sense of nausea, accompanying your sense of optimism. So what they do in Chukotka, I saw them dried over stoves and just hung in tents. Hanging them in trees outside often results in insects getting in them. And while that doesn't affect the entheogenic aspect of the fungus, it might make the person who eats it not appreciate the crunch of a beetle in his mouth. So anyway, it's 3. I never could figure out why 3 or maybe 5 as opposed to 2 or maybe 4. It's just that the odd number was what was best.
And are we talking about just the caps, or do people eat the whole mushroom, the stem as well?
Both. The whole mushroom, but more the caps. And in fact, the even here in the U.S., which is where I happen to be at the moment, some people have been known, instead of going to all this trouble, what they'll do is peel the cuticle off the cap, dry it, crumble it, put it in a pipe, and smoke it. And the effect is much less dramatic, but it is a pleasant effect. I mean, it's like having 1.5 beers. Well, actually, I mean, the equivalent high is like 1.5 beers, I should say. The flavor is slightly different, as you might have gathered. But yeah, they'll both. Some people will just dry the whole mushroom and consume it, and others will just dry the caps.
And right, another way to process the ibotenic acid into muscimol, right, is to digest it, right? Because the muscimol is urinated out. But so you hear a lot of these stories of reindeer. I've heard both drinking the reindeer urine, but also the shaman's urine as a way to have these psychoactive effects.
Yeah, it's the shaman urinates the alkaloids pass 95% unaltered through the urine. And in the old days, it would be the higher up person, the shaman, who ate the mushroom. But then his constituents would be gathering around waiting for him to urinate. He would. They would put the urine in cups and drink it. And then the reindeer would be gathering around waiting for the constituents to urinate. And they would eat it, drink it, as a matter of fact. And reindeer have it's a well-documented fact that reindeer have powerful interest in this mushroom. The mushroom commonly grows in places tundra with dwarf birch, or in Arctic boreal places with birch, where reindeer commonly hang out. Reindeer are not a tropical species. And while Amanita muscaria has, by the way, been documented in the subtropics, reindeer have not been. So they have a long history of knowledge of this particular mushroom. And it's especially male reindeer during rutting season will go bananas after it. They will go looking for it. It somehow increases their rutting. As a result, Sami, Lap reindeer herders will use Amanita muscarias. So sometimes herding reindeer can be a bit of an issue. But if you put an Amanita muscaria along the trail where you want them to go, they will go there. And you've successfully herded them to the appropriate place.
Right. And so this this leads us in the direction of a kind of the seasonal link I mentioned earlier. So the other day, actually, I saw a friend's Christmas tree that had a little Amanita muscaria, ornaments hanging in the trees. And I'd just been reading about how they, traditionally would dry them in the trees. And obviously these are reindeer herders. And once one first hears about this connection, I think, between the kind of modern European myth of Santa Claus and Siberian shamanism, it's, to me, even though it can't really be proven definitively, I guess, it seems kind of, the number of connections seem overwhelming. Is this something that you think there's something?
However, I've argued against this. Did you read my essay called Travels with Santa and His Reindeer?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Okay, I initially, like you, associated Santa Claus and his reindeer with Siberia. But then I decided that there were similar activities being performed by shamans in Lapland, northern Scandinavia. And, they would, in the dead of winter, go through the chimneys of yurts to meet with their constituents. But here's the important thing. In Siberia, no one travels by reindeer. They travel by dog sled. In Lapland, they travel by reindeer, and still do, especially when tourists are around, travel by reindeer-drawn sleds. And the use goes back, it's long died out among the Lapps, the Sami people. So what I've argued is that because it was easier for the image, this image of Santa Claus and reindeer to enter European lore from Lapland than from Siberia, indeed from distant eastern Siberia, right. More likely, and I'll go into a second how Santa Claus is presumably associated with the mushroom. It's more likely that it came down into Europe from Lapland. Right. And for the longest time, in fact, Lapps were regarded by civilized Europeans as being virtually folkloric people, people who could cause diseases with like that. Their women could bring on strong winds to prevent boats from reaching Lapland if those women so desired. But here's the thing. You've got a Sami shaman pulling up in the dead of winter at a yurt. He can't get in the front door. There's too much snow. So he has to climb down the chimney, but the chimney, or the chimney hole, has been altered to allow the entrance of people and the people leaving as well. So this is no big deal. He's also eaten an Amanita muscaria before arrival. because that will help him make whatever decision he needs to make when the person he's visiting says, well, excuse me, but so my next door reindeer herder has stolen my wife. Anyway, and it is said that a person who, or a shaman who eats Amanita muscaria looks like Amanita muscaria. So imagine this mushroom, sort of a plump, reddish mushroom with white spots, transformed into a human being. Okay, that's what is sitting now in the, and the Santa image then, because of all of this, tended to filter down into Europe long before, and it becomes, I mean, to my mind, it isn't all of Santa Claus. There are all sorts of other images, Father Christmas images, that tend to be combined in his character. Anyway, what's happening, though, is he's not providing the latest laptop or books or microwave to his constituents. He's providing advice. And that's the gift. It's not capitalism, it's pre-capitalism. And, you know, so the person says, gosh, well, my next door neighbor stolen my wife. Should I kill him, steal his reindeer? What should I do? The shaman has taken Amanita muscaria, and he comes up with whatever decision is necessary, which will probably be don't kill him. And a lot of it is indeed probably psychological. If your wife was that easily purloinable, then she wasn't worth having in the first place. Oh, thank you so much. And reindeer meat or other forms of gift are given to the shaman, which indeed aids and abets his bulk. So one can imagine these individuals riding around in sleighs being not only bulky because of the bulk of Amanita muscaria, but also bulky because they've been well fed by their people to whom they've been given advice.
Right. And it's worth emphasizing the point you made at the start there of, when I asked you that question, I was fairly lazily grouping this huge range of cultures, from Lapland in Northern Europe through to Eastern Siberia under this kind of umbrella of Arctic mushroom shamanism. And there is obviously a commonality, but it's striking how big an area it is. And even in Mongolia, there's these, you were mentioning the Bronze Age petroglyphs. I was astounded, I only found this in my research for this conversation. There were these monoliths with flying reindeer on them, which I couldn't believe when I was looking at these connections between Amanita shamanism and Santa Claus, Father Christmas. I mean, and in that case, you're not talking about, we don't know for a fact these were Amanita consuming people, but you have the kind of the cultures. It's not a far reach to imagine this was stretching back all the way to the Bronze Age. Yes, exactly.
And we should probably talk a bit about flying reindeer,
right?
Because they're not naturally organisms that will take to the air, but they eat Amanita muscaria commonly, whenever possible, and this gives. We assume, because it gives us a sense of flying, it also gives them a sense of flying. And it's an airborne sleigh pulled by the very mushroom, not pulled by, but in which is seated the very mushroom that's causing it to be airborne in the first place. Very interesting. And I've often mentioned in giving talks, about Rudolph the red-nosed reindeer.
Of course.
Yes. And people will say, maybe not. So I said, well, excuse me, but does eating this mushroom make one's nose turn red? Because there is, after all, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. And I said, no, it doesn't. But commonly, reindeer, caribou, other cervids as well, are attacked by warble flies, and the larvae are in their nose, easiest and softest place to lay one's eggs. And what happens if there are a lot of them is that the nose turns red. And whether this is just parallel evolution from, I've forgotten who created the Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer thing, but whether it's parallel evolution or whether somehow this individual had noticed, seen, or read about red-nosed reindeer, I don't know. But reindeer can very well, and a number of them can be red-nosed.
I mean, I can also just speculating, thinking out loud, I can imagine just this circular red nose, as it's often depicted, just looks like an Amanita cap in itself. And, if you imagine a reindeer, snuffling around on the ground, I can imagine being like, hey, look, it looks like its nose is red. It looks like its nose is the mushroom.
No.
So who knows? I mean, exactly. Maybe we're just speculating. But
maybe not. But then the nose would have to have white splotches.
Right. Yeah.
Which are the warts. And by the way, they aren't warts. They're called warts in the literature, but it isn't warts. They do not have like the fungal equivalent of planter's warts. These are part of the universal veil. So when the mushroom is just starting out, rising to the ground, a sheath covers it, a veil that's white. And as it grows and expands, that breaks. And some of it is the ring around the stem, and some of it are the little whitish tufts, like bits of cloth on the cap. And these are, as I said, called warts, but strictly speaking, they're not warts.
Right, and it's quite striking. I think when you see an Amanita, the way that it's quite beautiful, the way it comes out of almost like an egg, right? It's almost like a white egg with this veil.
That's right.
And the base of the stem is very bulbous. It kind of comes out the ground in a very satisfying way. Yeah, and as you said, you can brush off all the white stuff because it's not actually warts; it's just the leftover.
Yeah, exactly.
The veil, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And they grow in symbiotic relationship with trees, right? They're mycorrhizal. You can't just grow them in a lab in a petri dish. And I've read that a lot of the time it's pine and spruce and the kinds of evergreen trees that we see, associated with Christmas.
They're one of the mycorrhizae. They're not, well, I should say there aren't a lot. There are quite a few, but less than 50% of all mycorrhizal species are specific to either deciduous or conifers, whereas Amanita muscaria can grow with both. And in Siberia, it's primarily birch. And because birch, I suspect that part of the mystery and some of the virtues and the attitude toward Amanita muscaria comes from its being connected with birch, which is a sacred tree in Russia. There's so much literature about it, and so many poems and chants and paintings, etc. And a lot of paintings of Amanita muscaria done in Russia in the old days show them with the birch trees. So yes, it is indeed mycorrhizal. Where I've collected it on the west coast of the U.S., it's mycorrhizal more with pines.
Right.
What about the UK?
So I'm currently in Portugal, actually, where it's quite commonly mycorrhizal with eucalyptus, and it's eucalyptus obviously coming from Australia, where it's never been observed. I don't even know if they have Amanita in Australia. Maybe that's why it's not been observed. But yeah, here you see them growing around Amanita, growing around.
Yeah. Now I'm wondering if it's the same species in Portugal as the UK.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
There are many different varieties of Amanita muscaria, and the one we have on the east coast of the U.S. Has such a high percentage of ibotenic acid that less of it becomes muscimol than on the west coast. Here it's Amanita muscaria variety Gassolii, and there it's Amanita muscaria variety muscaria. I don't have no idea what it is in. Are you looking for mushrooms? I don't know what the seasonality in Portugal is, but I would suspect it would be somewhat different from the UK.
Yeah, I mean, because it's so warm in winter. And actually, fortuitously enough, 2 days ago, I walked out my front door, and literally 2 meters in front of my front door was an amanita that I've dried and have here. And I've never picked one before, but yeah,
No
that's just a
kidding.
piece of the cab. There were two huge ones, and I couldn't believe it when because we'd already booked in this call, and yeah, my wife thought it.
Are you doing research or stuck in Portugal?
No, we're kind of setting up a retreat center out here. I'm doing research in London, so I split my time between Portugal and London. But Portugal's a nicer place to be for winter. Well, unless you love the Arctic.
But I would be happy to come to that retreat center and give presentations, walk some more. And I usually focus on ecological aspects of fungi and ethnographic aspects, the more broadly contextual aspects, rather than, okay, here's how you identify this down to species, and then throw out a binomial that goes in one ear and out the other of the people who are around you.
Yeah, definitely. You'd definitely be welcome anytime. We have, so as I mentioned, we have a ring of eucalyptus trees, and these were growing just by one of them. But I looked up I wanted to they're growing in a circle, and we were thinking how nice it would be to have a ring of Amanita at Christmas time. So I've tried to propagate them by mushing up the cap and like mushing it in with the soil around the other eucalyptus. So yeah, that'd be wonderful. You can come and show people.
I would be delighted to do that. Yeah, I'd be delighted to do that. I'm curious. What's interesting? Is eucalyptus an invasive species in Portugal, or is it native?
It's not native, I think. I think it originally came from Australia.
No. Yeah, in California, it's not native. And things that grow on eucalyptus, fungi, are considered inedible because they're metastasizing chemicals into toxins, or they're taking toxins. And so something that might be edible on another tree, if you know what's called chicken of the woods,
Right.
On other trees, it's perfectly fine. On eucalyptus, it makes people sick. I don't think, I'm imagining if, let us say some shamanically inclined individual in Portugal eats a Amanita muscaria, there's a big difference between being connected underground by the roots mycorrhizally and being connected by way of just being on the tree. So in all probability, that person would not end up just getting his stomach upset. Whereas if it was a wood inhabiting species, he probably would get his stomach upset, or she.
Yeah. This one was just popping up out of the ground, out of the soil, about a meter away from the sun.
Where are you in Portugal?
In the south, about 1 hour north of the south coast, in the mountains.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I envy you. Are you bouncing back and forth despite COVID?
That was the plan before COVID, and then we've just been hunkering down here. But come springtime, I'll be spending probably half my time in London.
Lucky you. Let me know when you're next hunkered down there.
Yeah, we'll do. So before we run out of time, I'd love to just hit another couple points we see this like associated a lot with the kind of European fairy tales, right? This is the most iconic mushroom in the world, arguably. You see it in illustrations of books, and I don't know. It's interesting that with things like psilocybin and DMT, these other naturally occurring things, people do see kind of elf-like kind of entities and things. You mentioned that people have this experience of kind of contacting the ancestors with Amanita. I've not actually read much about this, but I guess it's pointed to so often. I feel like there's some connection there of the kind of the mushroom folk, elves and fairies, and these psychoactive mushrooms.
I'm not so sure because there's so many other mushrooms that also are connected with elves and fairies. In fact, in the 19th century, in England, almost all mushrooms, I mean, you know, a lot of paintings of fairy folk or brownies, and they were, the mushrooms were not Amanita muscaria at all. Some of them were what's called fairy ring mushrooms, or some of them were just generic. And absolutely my favorite painting, and I think it might be in this book. This is a version of it. This is from the 1840s or 1850s.
And it's a bit higher.
Sorry. Yeah, higher. Here we go.
There you go.
This is from my book,
Wow.
Fungipedia. It's an illustrator's line drawing version of a painting by, you ever heard of Richard Dadd, D-A-D-D? He was a Victorian artist who spent most of his time in a lunatic asylum. He killed his father, and he was determined to be insane, and spent 50 years of his life there, where he did all sorts of incredible paintings. This one, the painting that I think your people who are your viewers should look up Richard Dadd plus Puck, because he's got an image of Puck, the primordial fairy figure, seated on top of a giant whitish yellow, not Amanita muscaria, but generic whitish yellow mushroom, and smiling, shall we say, salaciously, while dancing around the mushroom are nude men and women. Now, I wish I could hold up the actual painting for you, but I don't have it on the premises. But that indicates really that the fairy connection goes well beyond Amanita muscaria to a notion. And it has a lot to do with a number of different attitudes, one of which is the traditional mycophobic attitude of Brits. That is, mycophobia being hatred, dislike, or disgust toward mushrooms. Brits are not, of course, alone in that attitude.
Right.
But yeah, it's very interesting that when we think of eating this, that in the North America, there is only one native group that I or anyone else has documented as eating Amanita muscaria. And all on the coast of California, Washington, Oregon, it commonly grows, but none of the native people ever ate it. This one group is in an area in the Yukon, and it's a small group of about 1,500 people. And they had it's possible that they had some contact with Siberia, because their shamans would drink it, urinate, people would drink the urine. But it was basically, it was also not just the shamans, it was a young girl. She would eat it and urinate, and then someone would drink the urine and have a vision. And what they do were they were using it in hunting caribou. And by drinking the young girl's urine, they would have an image of where the caribou were. They were using it not to get in touch with their ancestors, assuming that caribou weren't their ancestors, but to find out where in the mountains and the valleys we can find the caribou. And I asked one of the elders who told me about this, well, did you ever drink a young girl's urine? And he grimaced. He said, yes, a few times. The grimace indicated that it was perhaps better, if one had to pick and choose, both not to drink the urine and not to find the caribou.
So you've mentioned, I think in a lecture I saw, the importance of laughter in certain ones of these cultures. Maybe it was in the Chukchi. And is that something that you feel is linked to the kind of the effects of the mushroom, of the Amanita, the fact it produces this kind of mildly euphoric or positive feeling?
I think that's one of the effects of it. but I also think that I travel a lot with these northern native cultures. I'll give you an example of something that happened. I was having coffee in a tent in Greenland, and it was very windy, and I was having coffee with a local Greenlander. And finally, the wind blew the tent down on top of us and spilled the coffee, etc. And I cursed mightily, and he burst into riotous laughter. Because one of the ways that you manage the difficulties of life in northern cultures, in which there are traditionally more difficulties than there are in climate control, temperate cultures, is laughter. And I'm actually writing about this now because one of the ways I think one can manage the difficulties of COVID-19 is laughter or humor as well. I've often seen this. I was at a place in the 90s where the fax machine malfunctioned, and a white guy came and tried to use it, then kicked it, walked away. And an Inuk came, tried to use it, malfunctioned, burst into laughter, and walked away. Excellent survival mechanism.
Right. Well, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much, Lawrence. Is there any way you would send people to look into your work more?
Sorry, to look into, I suspect that, sorry, they could go to my website, but I keep forgetting I have a website. I do have a couple of interesting blogs. Well, I dropped out of the Explorers Club is one of them. That's on the website, but it's also on the internet if they Google my name and, Explorers Club. The books are all available. I would prefer that they go to local bookstores and independent bookstores rather than franchises. But if all else fails, they can find this book, among others, Fungipedia, on Amazon UK. So that's what I would recommend.
Great.
And get in touch with me. If you're in a place like Portugal and want me to come and give a presentation, by all means, Google me. Definitely. You'll find my email address and say, please come. The mushrooms are sprouting everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, everyone should keep an eye out and see if there are any future collaborations down the line. Yeah, thanks again, Lawrence.
I hope so. Yeah, thank you. It's good chatting with you.